I'd like to read something for you. Soul and ego. That which is real is free. It is free of habit and predetermined preferences, having no judgment based on moral or philosophical teachings. It is not afraid, nor is it conditioned by propaganda or coercion. It is spontaneous, immediate, and focused only upon the present moment. It is spirit. That which is truth is committed to a line of involvement, a form of expression, having a seed and a fruit. Its ability to sustain, nurture, and hold is what makes possible the realization of the real. These are not two separate forces, but one energy expressing rhythm as duality. This is sound and echo, light and shadow, wave and particle. This is life, all life. On the personal level, our inclination to do again what we have done before registers as patterns of behaviour in the brain's synapses. These very inclinations make us who we are and determine our perceptions, therefore our version of reality and likelihood to feel, think and act in a predetermined way. Without such programming, we would have no sense of self other than the feeling of being alive. When we talk of ego, we are examining the patterns we hold and are held by. Egoism celebrates these patterns, whereas egotism clenches onto them, even in the face of evidence in favour of change. Our unwillingness to let go of egotistical patterns is based on fear, which is the feeling we have when faith is missing. The soul cannot embrace the essentially rhythmic nature of physicality without surrendering its spontaneity and adopting patterns of behaviour and thought. Babies lose contact with soul consciousness as they learn to accept worldly programming. The more we try to become worldly, the less soul freedom remains. This process is reversed in old age or in mysticism, when the ego's grasp is relaxed and worldliness is no longer dominating the psyche. Any life problem is not more or less than the externalization of an unhelpful pattern of thought, a synaptic inclination within the brain. It takes a very clear mind indeed to dominate and overcome synaptic inclinations. There are easier and more effective ways to reprogram ourselves than such mental discipline. It is far easier to replace one perception with another than to eradicate an ingrained habit of perception. Travel to a new land with a different culture forces us to see things differently. Harmony singing has a similar effect upon the mind. Dancing also makes us respond spontaneously and freely. Frequent changes in lifestyle promotes the change process. The fundamental thing is not to remain stuck. Any habitual line of feeling, thought or behaviour robs us of soul freedom, yet paradoxically empowers us to deepen our involvements. The arising of paradox is inevitable. The paradox game is best played by one who maintains some detachment, even when passionately involved, and whose freedom is not compromised at all by these involvements. It is meaning that brings freedom to involvement. It is involvement that brings meaning to freedom. These two wisdoms are enough to energize our life path to realization. A very high degree of wisdom is to be found when we ponder the third. It is freedom that brings involvement to meaning. The soul is freedom, made focused as a unique attempt to explain and demonstrate one facet of spirit, the essential meaning of life. Without a clear idea, there is confusion. First thought ended the primary chaos and initiated all existence. An amorphous field of constantly shifting polarized energy, like an electromagnetic field, is the potential for life. It becomes life in response to thought, which pulls energy into specific focus. Soul is such a focus, and becomes more and more clearly and specifically expressed in the form of ego, yet forgets its soul self in that process. Eventually we are certain to remember our soul selves again, yet to do so before death is of immense value to the soul, to spirit, and to all beings, because this is what allows spiritual light to infuse worldliness and bring love, beauty, and harmony into life. We're often given to understand that the meaning of life is not knowable. That's a really strong conditioning that we grow up into, because those people that are programming us or teaching us, they think, don't know the meaning. Very few people do. But it's actually as easily learned as other things that I've studied. I've studied accountancy and calculus. I didn't find those easy at all. And this philosophy of the meaning of life is a lot easier to understand than quite difficult things. But we just have to break down our reluctance to know that we can know. Break down our insistence on ignorance and just allow that if you want to know, you can know. What's difficult to understand? There is an electromagnetic field which permeates everything in life. We know this. That's an amazing mystery. How else can we have radio waves and so on? You know, you hear a song on a radio and you think, wow, that's a nice song and so on. But the fact that you can hear that song on the radio is the miracle of the moment. Wow, that's amazing. We know about the electromagnetic field around us. Just imagine that that's the beginning of it all, that existed. And simultaneously, and this is a very interesting point, simultaneously there arose two things in polar distinction to each other. First, thought and creativity. Creativity is all and everything. It's new. Everything else is borrowed or copied and pasted and reorganized and so on. But creativity is new. And the very first moment of creativity was first thought. And in that moment, what was created was not only creation, but also the creator. They simultaneously arose. There's no reason for us to suppose that the creator pre-existed creativity and creation. How could that be? They're all part of the same explosion into polarity. So this electromagnetic field, which was amorphous, it had no shape, had no form, became shaped by the first thought. In the beginning was the word. The thought has direction, it has form. You think this rather than that. Now, the degree we can understand between what is confusion, which is an amorphous field of thought energy. That's what confusion is. A chaos of mind is confusion. We don't know anything. We don't know what we're thinking, even, when we're confused. And you look at the opposite of that, which is concentration. Concentration. We center the mind really specifically. Concentration is the opposite of confusion. As soul concentrates spirit to be the opposite of an amorphous field. And it goes in a certain direction then, that's a thought direction, towards greater and greater concentration. And the soul incarnates on that journey of greater and greater concentration. And the ego then exists and becomes greater and greater concentrated in its involvements. And the most egotistical people and the most egoistical people, they form an involvement which is more noticeable, significant, and impactful upon reality. And then eventually we get old or we become interested in mysticism, and the worldly involvements don't bother us anymore. We're not troubled by the need to find out who we are, which is the process of incarnation and involvements. When you know who you are, you think, Okay, what now? And the world doesn't attract you anymore. And the mystic gets to know this before death. And so there's this liberation period. The last chapter of the life of a mystic is freedom itself. And your involvements then are much, much more short in duration. You focus on the moment in hand, and you're involved in the moment in hand, all of them, one after another, and it's all exciting. You've got that amount of energy. You can involve yourself in every single moment, but for no duration necessarily. You don't have to do it again and again. You don't have to do the same thing repeatedly. There's no need. Other people who are doing that, they're caught up in that. And it's to do with this patterning of the brain. As soon as you do something more than once, there's this rut of thinking develops in the brain, and you're inclined to do that more and more and more and more and more. And that's where you're caught up in your sense of self, and that's what egotism is. But to break these patterns of thought, that's the game. That's the trick that we have to try and master in life. And there are different ways of doing that. Anything that changes how you think, and therefore how you speak, and therefore how you act, and therefore how you feel. How you think starts though, because the mind is the Lord. The mind is the king, queen, the master of everything. So how you think is all and everything. To change your habits of thought, it may be a lot more pleasant, and it certainly is a lot easier to change your habits of behaviour. And then your thinking will change. It's quite difficult to change the way you think. You know, most people don't have the capacity to think about thinking. So it's hard to change something you can't think about. They get lost in the process of thinking without knowing that they are something doing the thinking. But if you actually try that, you can work that. You can change your mind if you're powerful enough of the mind, clear focus. But there's an easier way of doing it. The easiest way of all is travel. Travel to a foreign country. And then your mind has to change the way it perceives things. Everything's different. Singing really does have an impact for some reason. But if you actually learn how to sing carefully and sensitively, and you just listen and sing, and that's what you're doing. You see, you're listening and singing. It's that duality merged into one event that's the key here. You can't sing really without listening. If you're in a harmony choir, for example, that's really important. It's the same with dancing, because you can't dance unless you're listening to the music. So you're listening to what's going on, and you're feeling it as well, and you're allowing your body just to move in response to that. So once again, you're doing the yin and the yang of an activity, and actually holding your consciousness above duality. So that's why singing and dancing works. But any change in life, any change, whatever, if you just change your job, or change your friends, or your partner, or your location of where you live, if you change anything, that's helpful in the direction of awakening. Because what we're trying to understand is that these synaptic inclinations of thought render us asleep. They render us automatic. It's unconscious. We program ourselves to behave in a certain way, and we just don't even think about it anymore. We say we think, but it's not really true. And I've seen that happen at a very young age. I saw that happen in my family when they were relatively young, and they just stopped thinking and just continued to behave in the same way that they always behaved, because they got the results they wanted. And what they wanted were security, comforts, some pleasure, freedom from embarrassment, freedom from conflict, freedom from anything uncomfortable, basically, which calls them to redefine the relationship between soul and self. And so they died off, basically, very young. And this description, it fits many, many people. People are not awake, and they're not alive. They're just like automatons, robots, working it towards some measured goal which doesn't help the soul at all. So we have to change the inclination of how we think and how we behave and how we feel if we're to awaken into soul consciousness, because the soul is spontaneous and free. It doesn't have habit. It makes it up creatively each moment. We have to be more and more and more creative, not in terms of writing poetry and drawing pictures. Just do something now which you feel like doing, and check it out. Does it feel right? Check your feelings, check your thinking. Is it silly, or does it make sense? Try and blend thinking and feeling and doing, being and acting. Just try and blend these opposites, and do that as a way of life. It's not something you do and then you've finished doing and you've done the job. It's not like that. It's something that you have to remember how to do, because that's the only eternal reality there is. We practice throughout eternity to get better at this. And that's life. That's what life is. Practicing to see both sides of the duality simultaneously. Therefore, we're above duality, whilst actually in life as well. Now, to be able to see above the duality when you're in the duality itself, that's the game. That's realisation.